As the ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, I do believe it's my responsibility to present, as I am able, a straightforward, honest figures about the spending bills that come before our Senate. H.R. 2112 is the first of several minibus bills that apparently will be used in lieu of the normal appropriations process. This minibus is so named because it contains 3 appropriation bills put in one, not one as we normally see before the Senate. The Agriculture Bill, Commerce, Justice, Science, and the Transportation and Housing Bill, all cobbled together in one. The Democratic majority contends that this package will save taxpayers money. But this is just more Washington accounting. And the debt limit deal provided for an allowance for disaster spending equal to the average of the 10 prior years of disaster spending, which can be assessed or spent simply by providing the proper words in the appropriations bills that come forward across the floor, as these 3 do. But the majority contends that this money should magically not be counted when you decide how much is spent by the bill. Why? Well, it's a disaster, and disaster spending doesn't count, don't you know? As amended on the Senate floor 2 weeks ago, the bill contains now $3.2 billion in new spending above the caps for disaster relief, a further increase of 20% to the disaster assistance. Two additional amendments were adopted just last week, adding to the amount that the committees had produced as disaster assistance. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, our official scorekeeper, includes it as an expenditure. It's included as an expenditure in the CBO score, $3.2 billion. No one has challenged them because it appears they are plainly correct to count the $2.2 billion as spending. Only in Washington can it be asserted that the government can spend $3.2 billion and it not count. The bill sponsors contend that the discretionary spending portion of the bill, as I indicated, has gone down from $129 billion to $128. But the CBO says it went up to $131 billion. The disaster funding represents a 2% discretionary increase at a time when spending is supposed to be going down. Further, the bill sponsors say you should not count the mandatory spending in it. Mandatory programs that are contained in the bill. They insist that mandatory spending is not under the control of the appropriators. Again, this is logic that only exists in Washington. In truth, it's not unusual for the Appropriations Committee to take actions that impact mandatory programs, and it can be done, but of course it was not in this bill. For example, food stamps, the largest mandatory program by far in this bill, actually is larger than any other program in the whole bill. It amounts to 75% of total agriculture appropriation spending, 75%. Most people think agriculture programs are bailing out farmers. Those benefits to farmers have been reduced steadily over the years. Now 75% of the agriculture bill is a mandatory program, the food stamps being the largest. Like welfare reform, responsible changes to the way the government operates this program will improve outcomes, help more needy people achieve the goal of financial independence, not dependence, and stop fraud, which most Americans know is pretty common in the food stamp program. In addition, the bill uses another gimmick to rescind discretionary appropriations provided in prior years that for one reason or another can no longer be spent for their intended purposes. That is, the bill rescinds budget authority that CBO estimates will not result in any cash savings over the next 10 years. Rather than letting the appropriations lapse and saving this money and being thankful we got the project done at less than normal, less than the projected cost, this bill, as has been done before, pretends to be responsible and rescinds that money, which is then used to pay for the spending that will, in fact, result in cash expenditures from the Treasury. So this one gimmick in this bill would add $131 million in off-the-books spending. Finally, the bill finds savings in mandatory programs that game the government's cash flow and score as savings for this bill, but don't actually reduce the cost to the taxpayers. Meanwhile, appropriators get to spend the amount deferred over and over again, enabling ever higher amounts of discretionary spending. It would be like a family delaying a single $500 home repair for 10 years and then counting it as $5,000 in savings, $500 every year the repair didn't take place. In this case, over the past 3 years, the gimmick used in this bill has enabled $14 billion in higher spending. It gets worse. The bill also contains a number of Washington accounting tricks to sweep new spending under the rug. It's full of the typical gimmicks used to shove more spending into a bill that's already reached its spending limit. We've reached our limit. I remain amazed at the creativity used by spenders to defeat budget limits. Last year, just ended September 30th, was just shy of $1,300 billion. A spending cut of $7 billion for this year is a mere pittance in comparison. In no way is it even close to a significant reduction of the projected deficit we're going to have in this fiscal year, which began October 1st. We're now at Halloween. We still haven't passed the appropriations bill for the year we're in. Congress is not performing responsibly. It just is not. We haven't had a budget in over 900 days. Here's the bottom line. When discretionary and mandatory spending are scored in this bill, the overall spending compared to last year went up by $10 billion or 4% increase, not a cut. Relative to the amounts senators approved for these 3 bills last year, we're being asked to increase spending, not decrease spending. I believe that's fair and honest analysis of the bill that's before us. And if you were to exclude the mandatory spending, just ignore that huge increase in the food stamp program, the SNAP program, and even say the disaster assistance should be ignored, the so-called reduction in spending would be only a paltry $1 billion on these 3 bills all combined. So it's time to get serious. Denial in this Congress must end. You can't borrow your way out of debt. We are spending money we do not have. So I'm unable, Mr. President, to support this bill. By its own standards, it fails. It represents everything that's wrong with Washington today. It crams 3 bills into one that should have been considered individually, creating a process that curtails debate on spending at a time when we need more debate, not less. Further, it does virtually nothing to address the fiscal crisis threatening this country. It treats spending caps established earlier this summer as the most that can be saved, not as the starting point for saving, and then uses gimmicks to spend over and above that advertised limit. It's not a serious response to the explosive growth in federal spending. It falls short of the commitment we must make to handle the taxpayers' dollars honestly and responsibly. It's business as usual. The American people deserve better. I thank the chair and yield the floor.